There are many traps that are quite easy to fall into as human beings, primarily because as we come into this world, we come into it saddled with millions of years of mammalian evolution and psychology and extreme limitations, essentially evolutionary baggage. And I want to talk about some of that baggage today. Something that I think is a very important question and matter to address in today's social crises, right? If you want to call it that. And that is the notion that you are your ideas, you are something that you are presenting to the world, and that is your inextricable, inexorable identity. Now, there are a lot of variations of this. We've certainly seen in recent years the incredibly polarized nature of online life and various communities where people take a certain label and they wear it as a badge and they project it outwards towards the world. And any discrepancy and any deviation from that will be punished within that in-group that wears that badge. I've seen it in many, many, many circles, in many so-called communities. Personally, I am not a huge fan of the term community to describe some of these things. And make no mistake, everyone does it. I've seen MGTOW do it. I've seen, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, Forever Alone or incels do it. I've seen PUAs do it. I've seen people in the alt-right do it. People in the far left do it. The skeptics do it. It's all one label, and that label, that badge that you flash to the world of the internet, is the thing that defines you, right? Hey, I'm Stardust. I'm the MGTOW guy, right? That's all I am. Look at me, MGTOW. Now, you should know, if you've been with me for a long time, that's not how I think, and I'll go into more of that in a bit. But that is the nuts and bolts of the issue. But what I really want to talk about is how destructive that is. Now, one thing that did occur to me when I was younger was an association I had with my identity that was inextricably linked to my famous or infamous chronic illness, chronic insomnia. 10, 12 years ago, it had reached, for the moment, its peak. I just wasn't sleeping for 2 days in a row. It was just awful. I couldn't really work, but I had to anyway. I was a zombie, a walking zombie for about 2 years. And at some point in time in that madness, and I can assure you it is a type of madness when you're sleeping that little, I began to identify myself with my illness, with the insomnia. I just thought, I am the insomnia. Now, it's a little bit tricky here because when you're not sleeping at all or sleeping minimally for years or decades on end, it affects everything. It's something that I'm hyper aware of because I'm dumber for it. I'm weaker. I'm slower. Everything about me is worse off for it. I'm a lesser human being for it. However, one thing that really sort of burned itself into my mind at that time was that I was that. I was sort of this disease. And that's not the same thing as a label or badge you project out into the world as part of a group, but it's similar. And it took me a long time to realize that as much as this illness trails me and haunts me and always likely will until I drop dead, probably of some cause related to it, it isn't me. It's an element of me. It's part of me, but it isn't me. Just like being MGTOW, going my own way, is part of me, but it isn't me. The reality is that identity is immensely complex, and I don't mean that in a wishy-washy way, but complex systems, which I've talked about, are not reducible to any singular part. And that's certainly true of most human identities. But people can decide to stress or emphasize certain things over others. At the point where it becomes neurotic and a bit insane, a point that I had been in 10 years ago, 12 years ago, associating myself with a chronic illness, as I was that illness to my mind, it becomes pretty unhealthy. And that's an unhealthy way of stressing something that's part of you, not a particularly healthy thing in this case. And I've seen it with other people and other illnesses. Depression, for example, is generally recognized to be an illness, and many, many people have it. And some people have had it so long, so intensely, that they associate themselves with that depression, with that feeling that they have, their psychology. That's what they are, allegedly. And I've even seen it with other illnesses. People have limited mobility because of some disease that affects their musculature, and they begin to associate themselves with that disease. That's slightly different from this group identity, these labels that we wear and then project out into the world. But I'd argue that they're very similar, and there's a lot of crossover, and all this association that people do with a particular label or a way that they are, a pathology as Wojak recently named it, is just generally not healthy. There's the idea that, and it's not a very good idea because it's manifestly incorrect, that things are pretty fixed, right? Identity is fixed. What we are, how we think is fixed. The very notion that we are the same people that we were 10, 20 years ago, it's absolutely poppycock. But if you transfix yourself to a certain idea, a set of ideas, an identity, an illness that might plague you, you can, within reason, carry that around with you for the rest of your life. And it's not a particularly good piece of baggage to take on board. It's only natural to some degree. We're human apes after all. But one thing I've noticed in many of these circles, particularly the circles that don't help a whole lot, has been taking on that mantle, bearing it to the world, and never giving it up. And one thing I've noticed in particular in these manosphere communities, which are called a variety of things, Forever Alone, True Force Loneliness, Incel, however you want to put it, whatever differences there might be between those subgroups or categories or gradients, whatever, is increasingly that they begin to associate themselves with that label, which is perfectly normal. Again, I know a lot of guys in MGTOW who do the same thing. I think it's false. I don't think it's the best thing to do. We can go into reasons for that in a bit, but that's what they do. And then they find other people who do the same thing. And it becomes a veritable congregation of the damned, so to speak. Not damned in any real sense, but the perception of being damned. And it creates echo chambers, and I've seen it in political circles, and you name it. And it can also, as I mentioned in my own case, happen with illnesses and diseases. What is the ostensible benefit of that, though? What's the ostensible benefit of finding solidarity in such a group, of forming such a group to begin with, and reveling in it for as long as possible? For one thing, it's understanding. Something that Wojak in a recent talk pointed out, not on my channel, but on Monday Blues channel, that it's very difficult to relate to experience you simply don't have. And all of us are afflicted by that. If somebody has a particular illness I'm not familiar with, I can only struggle to imagine it. And I've encountered this a million times. When it comes to my own illness, for example, people offering me well-intentioned but oftentimes silly advice about what to do and the things I should try when I've tried everything under the sun. They don't get it, and I do my best not to talk about it in most circles. I don't expect them to. That's true of everything. The experience that one person has, in this case one man has, being socially isolated and not having access to the females that he desires. And in the case of these communities of men who have not had a lot of success with women, that becomes the badge they wear, and it's difficult for people to understand. And more importantly, people don't want to understand. Generally speaking, people don't want to understand hardship as a rule, and more precisely, they don't want to understand hardship that they themselves have not known. they're not willing to at least attempt, because it's always just an attempt, to walk a mile in the shoes of others. It is possible to do that, but it's not really in people's perceived best interest. And so these groups are formed, these identities are formed. It happens with everyone, even if it's not a group. Again, I've known tons of depressed people who've been depressed for so many years and decades that that's what they think they are. And nobody else gets it, allegedly, in some cases. I think many of us get depression, understand it, because we've experienced it. What I've tried to do, as a rule, with human beings and the people I interact with, I try to understand where they're coming from, even if it's not my experience. I've taken some time in recent weeks and months to look more into the communities called Forever Alone or True Force Loneliness or incels to get a picture of what's going on, because that's not been my experience. I'm willing to concede, for example, that due to my age and the generation I'm in, Generation X, that if I had been born much later, I might have been one of these guys. After all, I'm just an average guy. I did have some success with women, whatever that means. I stuck my pee-pee in some moist fish holes on occasion, and I had a couple of relationships, but that doesn't fit the profile of the modern Forever Alone guy or the True Force Loneliness guy. Times were different. Social circles were different. Dating apps didn't exist. So I'm willing to entertain the idea that, yeah, I might have ended up that way too, in some sense. And how would that have altered my mentality and my views of the world and how I engage with things, and et cetera, et cetera? Possibly quite radically. I got to where I am now with my views on human interactions, specifically male-female interactions, based off of real experiences I had with women. Not uncountable ones, but a decent number. And that informed me and gave me what I view the knowledge and the wisdom to no longer pursue those things. But on the other side of the picture, you get these guys who just have never had any contact with women. And then it begins to appear like something devoutly to be wished for, right? Like this dream, this thing. And it becomes part of their very identity. And become obsessed with it. The one thing they can't have, allegedly. Partnership or relationships with women. It becomes almost divine. And I actually get that. If you've been deprived of something in your whole life, it makes sense. You would pedestalize it. You would enshrine it. And make it seem to be far better than it actually is. Only to you, you can't perceive that it might not be nearly as good as it is claimed or you wish it to be, as attested to by the litany of voices who are offering counter signals there, myself included. Nonetheless, it's understandable. Still, the idea of attaching yourself to some particular element of your being, some status in this case, that you simply, for whatever reason, can't get access to the females you desire, and making that the definitive edition of your identity that you project onto the world, and your associations with people, can't be good. Again, to quote Wojak, you're not your pathology. I'd also argue you're not your ideas. Ideas shift. Things are in flux. It makes life really complicated, the fact that there's always change and things are always in transition, but such is life. And the best thing you can do is to roll with the punches. But if you become ensconced in a certain circle and mode of thinking, you might never get out. And it probably isn't helping you very much. Whatever obstacles an individual might face, identifying yourself with those obstacles, whether those obstacles are an illness or a state of affairs, if you identify yourself with that and that becomes you in your perception, how much more likely are you to overcome those things, get past them, and reach a point where maybe you are no longer plagued by those obstacles? Maybe you achieve some of the things you actually wanted to achieve. No guarantees, of course. It is life. Life is uncertain by its very nature. But it's something to consider. It's very tempting to feel that we're part of some element that makes us who we are, and elevate that element to a level that it just shouldn't be at. It's important for me to go my own way, but it's not important for me to loudly proclaim to the world that I'm going my own way, or I'm MGTOW. I don't really have that need. Sometimes things need to be reiterated. Sometimes things need to be pointed out, but I don't need to do that. Certainly not my own personal life. There are other things to it. Other things to me, and there are other things to you. Whatever obstacle you might face, getting too mired down in these things, and it's very easy. I understand this from my own experience, from other people's experience. It's very easy to develop tunnel vision and get locked down some situation that you find yourself in, and a situation that has greater duration than otherwise would have, and think, well, that's what I am and that's where I'm at. And eventually you lose the will to even leave it behind you, even though that might be the best thing to do. That is, leave it behind you. And that might take work. There are no guarantees here, obviously. But I think most of us have a sense of when reveling in some situation or label or badge that we wear is just not really beneficial. It's just going through the motions. And we do it to preserve a sense of continuity, a sense of belonging. Because most of us these days, we don't really belong anywhere. Any group, to anyone. If you begin to affix yourself too much to any one component of your very complex identity, you're going to stall yourself. And life is short, and you get stuck in that. And then it never ends, and then you drop dead before you had any chance to change. And that's not worth it, I don't think. So, this is an important topic, gentlemen. This idea that we're all part of something very specific, and we can never let go of it. And that's what we need to project into the world. That's what we need to tell the world we are. That one thing. Whether it's a depressive person, chronic insomniac, a forever alone guy, a MGTOW guy, a PUA, some pink-wearing SJW, a skeptic. Take your pick, any of these things. A card-carrying libertarian. The second you might consider that there are other things, or that your views have changed, or that you're more than just that one component, that's the only way things can improve, if they can at all. They can't always be improved. You don't always get out of these slumps. Sometimes we're stuck with the things we have. But being aware that we're more than that one thing is very important. It does give us that window of opportunity to get out of it, potentially. If it's bothersome. If it's viewed as something negative. And in many cases, it is. So as always, if I'm still alive, I'll catch you later, and until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.